Hey, this is Bishop Jackson on Affinity Xtra, where we do extraordinary things. Thank you so much for joining with us on this Rock Solid program today. Just like to tell you that we're moving out of January, we're going into February very soon, but we honor Dr. King with a reflection on where do we go from here. So we're going to add a few reflections on that, where do we go from here. You know, it's a wonderful privilege to reflect upon Dr. King's life and his lifestyle. And so I hope that you will join me in these next two conversations about where we go from here. And I'm speaking from the perspective as a Christian. I'm speaking from the perspective of a black man, a black preacher also, and a church that is majority black. It is not assigned itself as a black church, but it's become a majority black church due to the senior leadership all being black and from the Caribbean. So let's talk about that in the next few moments. You're listening to Affinity Xtra, where we do extraordinary things. Please make sure that when you go on YouTube, you like, subscribe, and share, and listen to the programs. You've also got a download as well. You can do it on Spotify, I think, as well. And then you can also listen online as well to our programs. Big respect to all of the rest of the presenters across. And as I am the Archbishop of the radio station, may the blessing and the peace of God be amongst everybody. I'm genuflexing. So that's to everybody. Anyway, and especially upon Roger, I have some holy water. No, it's not holy water. It's gel for hands. We're gonna use that instead of holy water now. So anyway. I hope you've been listening. I learned everything about football from this station. I learned everything about wrestling from this station. I learned everything about drill music from this station. I was like, I can't remember who was playing some real serious modern music. I think it was Nikki. I was like, Nikki Tapper is doing her best to go forwards in this thing. So let's talk about that together, okay? So I was reflecting on and in my program, in my reflection at this time, at some words that I read in Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter. I think it was chapter 1 Timothy chapter 1, and it's about verse 10. And in that, what I found was that there was a mention in some texts, maybe the New International Version, about the judgment upon certain people, and added amongst them in 1 Timothy chapter 10, chapter 1 and verse around about 10, okay, in our scripture, is the curse upon men stealers. There's a lot of other people cursing it, because you know the Bible just lists the curses. It lists the curses. It goes through a whole list of stuff. It goes through it says, I'll read it for you. It says, but we know that the law is good if a man use it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for the righteous man, but for the lawless and the disobedient, for the ungodly, for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God which was committed to my trust. This is Paul talking now. So in that, it's a very subtle word, because all throughout Paul is telling the servants how not to be killed, you know, to serve their masters well, and so on and so forth, because they've got a heavenly master. And in the exegesis of that context, we can see that you and I must see that necessarily looks at how servants and their masters work amongst themselves. So this was all amongst the Afro-Asian Mediterranean sort of bowl, where which they were working amongst themselves. There was no real so-called chattel slavery then as such, not in mass amounts, as you can see from transatlantic slavery and the brutality of that. It was kind of a different servant and master, slave then becoming a member of the family, slave then becoming lifted up and then brought into senior positions, being paid, if you like, and then getting their freedom. And in Jewish context, it's freedom after 7 years as well. And so the slaves are set free. Obviously, there are some parameters to that, because there must be an antecedent as to the brutality of slavery. So there must be some parameters. But there is always this conversation about how to treat the human being, because you have to answer to a God who will treat you and deal with you later. But in there's this word called man stealers. And in other texts, it says slave holders, slave traders. That is what the law is for, to deal with slave traders. And I thought that was fascinating for Paul to be talking to Timothy about who is going to be under judgment. You know, as we spoke about Dr. King, and we spoke about where we go from here, it's about, okay, how do we now forge a way forward in talking about our church and talking about our Christian life? Well, speaking about our Christian life and how we go forward from here is how then do we structure a model forward from this point where we're at. You know, reflecting on what Dr. King says in Where We Go From Here, that wonderful book written by Dr. King and also forwarded by Coretta Scott King, his first point is to find your worth. Find your worth. And in the contemporary time that Dr. King was sharing this was the rise of the Black Power movement. This was the fight against being seen as 3/5 human. This was the fight of racism. And so what Dr. King was talking about is the first structure you have to bring down is the one that makes you feel less than human. And that is why in my book, The Power of Agreement, I reflected on the agreement of humanity, or the agreement of the Christian, to look at themselves in the image of Christ. So when you look at yourself in the image of Christ, you are looking at yourself in a way that is equal with other ethnoses, because all ethnoses are part of the world that God sent his son to die for. And the New Testament also reminds us, or reflects, or helps us understand that the gospel is for all people, not just some people. And then there's no respecter of persons within the ministry of the gospel. And God is clear to point that out, even with resistance from Peter towards Paul, even resistance from Paul towards other groups of people at times. He says some scaling things about women. He says some scaling things about Cretans as well. They say the Cretans are gluttons and they love their belly. Certain things that Paul perhaps would get disciplined for in our day. So when we look at that, Dr. King, and I always like to have a background behind it, I think that Dr. King did a Sankofa, and he reflected upon who has built this reflection of self-worth up. And I think we always have to look at Marcus Garvey in contemporary times. Marcus Garvey really coined that phrase, black and beautiful, and remind us that we are no lesser race of people. That's why he talks about up ye mighty people. And remember, this is a day where this was seen as controversial speech. He also reflected on Africans for Africa as well. And so he now interpreted Africa as not this place to be feared, not this place to be ashamed of, but a place to be grateful to God for bringing you up from. And so that allowed the Caribbean now to find a home rather than the artificial place that they had been landed in. And they made much of it, because when you look at the Caribbean, it is the influence of the world. Hats off to Barbados, hats off to Jamaica for pushing their independence, but the biggest hat must go off to Haiti, that paid the highest price. And so across the Caribbean, we see examples of this resistance, the examples of self-empowerment. So what I'm also thinking about is, how do we then go forwards from here? And so Dr. King says, one, build your self-worth. And so we go for this reflection. Self-worth is about appreciating your blackness, about knowing the quality of what you bring into a room. One of the entrepreneurs in this city decided to resist the fact of being the entertainer without having his own people before him to bless and to entertain. And he's getting challenged, he's getting pushback over it. And so you and I need to look at this. We have to build self-worth by looking at how racism as an invention, how has it impacted me? How has it impacted my education? How has it impacted my health? How has it impacted my worldview? And so we need to look at this, and we need to rebuke and stand against the invention of race and racism. Because race and racism is an invention to pit one ethnos against another. As I always say, I'm from a beautiful lecture, and if I find that lecture, I will bring it into here, that race is an invention. And at Sam Sharp lecture a few years ago, an amazing academic reminded us that race and the race theory is an invention, and there is only one human race. This gives problems because then it reminds those who have created racism as a model of destruction for others and prosperity for others, as is now found to be a fabricated structure that creates supremacy. And so now we've got to break down racist structures. Racist structures are those structures that favor one race above another, academically, spiritually, and financially. So those three areas: academically, spiritually, and financially. When you are told academically that your race has a lesser IQ, then you will accept the lesser roles. When you are told beyond that, spiritually, that your race can only worship things as animals, then you are not going to find yourself in a position of hearing and speaking to Yahweh, to your God, to God, who is the creator of all people. You will say that you are less a creation. You are from the animal breed rather than the human breed, because how is it that you are then discussed as 3/5 human or undeveloped? God allowed you to be undeveloped in that sense. And so also financially, how is it then impacted on you financially? And so when you see structures of gain from your oppression, and then you are now trying to wrestle out of your oppression, and that other person now has the advantage of gain from your oppression, that has to be looked on as well. You know, so the first point of my reflection today is dealing with self-worth, and that is a especially challenging thing for us, and even myself, who has been through the schooling system in this nation. I never thought of myself as valuable in the classroom, always cringing when they showed parts of Africa that are so-called underdeveloped, but what we would call now rural and beautiful. And also showing tribal villages and showing how they operate in their understanding and civilization in the village, and looking at that and reflecting upon that as an embarrassment, but then looking again and recognizing that that is not an embarrassment, that is a blessing. So together we look at this and say, okay, where do we go from here? We now need to have self-reflection, rebuke racist structures, racist actions, racist theology, and racist education. Those are some key things that we have to rebuke. And we also rebuke racist propaganda, the things in the media that subtly make us look less than human. So that's what we've got to challenge ourselves. So this is my first part of my conversation with you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will conversate again on Affinity Xtra, where we do extraordinary things. God bless you. Thank you so much.
What's going on, people? I'm DJ H. And make sure you check out all the stuff Affinity Xtra's got going on, man. We've got loads of content, loads of things coming out. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You know, listen. Don't go anywhere. You know, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe is the main thing. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it with your brethren. Yeah.